Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Finally, my jobless and useless wife is dead. Now I can finally breathe, Trevor said, his voice rough with a twisted kind of relief. He stood at the side of the hospital bed in Baltimore, Maryland, dressed in a black shirt and dark slacks, like a man paying respects, but his eyes shone with victory, not grief. He laughed quietly, the sound low and ugly, the laugh of someone who believed a burden had been lifted. He rubbed his hands together, as if shaking off years of inconvenience, instead of mourning a woman who had given him everything. His shoulders, once tense, seemed to loosen with every breath he took beside her motionless body. Now we can finally be together in peace, my love. We do not have to hide anymore, Sierra said softly as she stepped closer to him. She wore a black dress that clung to her figure and a necklace that glinted under the harsh hospital light. She slipped her hand through his arm and leaned into him with practiced ease. They never realized that the woman they believed was gone could hear every word. They thought of her as an empty shell covered in white sheets and wires, a person already erased. They did not know that behind the closed eyelids and silent lips, her mind was awake, listening, remembering, and quietly hardening. Vanessa lay on the narrow hospital bed, wrapped in crisp white blankets, machines gently pulsing beside her to help her breath. The monitors traced the steady rhythm of her heart, a soft beeping that proved she was still here. Doctors had declared her to be in a deep coma. Her chances of waking, they said, were low. The people she called family had already decided their own verdict. They did not see her as resting or fighting. They saw her as finished. In their minds, Vanessa Reed, the wife who woke before dawn and slept past midnight for 3 long years, was nothing more than a body waiting to be buried. Vanessa heard Trevor's laugh break the sterile silence of the hospital room. She heard Sierra's agreement, the way the other woman's voice warmed with excitement at the thought of a future without secrets. She heard the scrape of a metal chair as they sat down comfortably beside the bed, like guests attending a celebration instead of a vigil. Inside, Vanessa's mind screamed. She tried to move her lips, to open her eyes, to twitch a finger, anything to show she was still alive. She pushed against the heavy darkness pressing down on her body, but it felt like sinking through wet concrete. Nothing responded. She was trapped, fully conscious inside a body that had gone quiet. Trevor stepped closer to the bed and studied her face with a strange mix of satisfaction and boredom. "So this is how it ends," he said calmly. "All that cooking, all that cleaning, all that suffering you went through just to please me." His words landed like stones, piling on top of years of quiet sacrifices. He shook his head slowly, as if looking back on a failed idea rather than a marriage. "She worked herself to death trying to impress people who never cared about her," he added, his tone dismissive, like the effort had been nothing more than a bad habit. The corners of his mouth curved upward as he looked away. "How pathetic," Sierra said as she leaned against his shoulder. She was always so desperate, always trying so hard. As if being useful would make her lovable. Sierra's voice was soft, but her words were sharp enough to cut through the fog in Vanessa's mind. They were talking as though she were a project that had gone wrong. Trevor and Sierra laughed together, not loudly enough to bring a nurse running, but quietly enough to make the cruelty intimate. It was a private performance for 2 people who thought the audience had left. The sound slid under Vanessa's skin, lodging deep in a place that had once been full of hope and belief. Vanessa remembered waking before sunrise every day to start the coffee, iron his shirts, and prepare breakfast. She remembered staying up past midnight, wiping down counters and folding laundry while her legs trembled with exhaustion. She remembered standing in the kitchen, her back burning, her eyes gritty, telling herself over and over, just try harder. She remembered the endless cycles of demands and criticism. A meal slightly late, a shirt not pressed perfectly, a smile that faded too quickly. Each became proof that she was failing. 3 years of a marriage that gave her nothing but expectations, insults disguised as jokes, and the occasional empty compliment thrown like a crumb. Now she lay still, listening to them speak about her life as if it meant nothing. Trevor's footsteps shifted near the bed. A soft sigh of relief left his mouth, like someone finishing a long, unpleasant task. To him, this was closure. To Vanessa, it was the moment she realized he had never truly seen her. The door opened with a quiet click, and Trevor's mother walked into the room. Gloria's face carried no grief, only a firm satisfaction that fit her perfectly pressed clothes. "So it finally happened," she said, her voice calm and steady. I warned her. A woman who does too much forgets her place. She looked down at Vanessa's still body and clicked her tongue with disapproval, not sorrow. All that effort and she still failed, Gloria said. At least now my son is free. Free from what? Vanessa thought, her mind throbbing. Free from a woman who washed his clothes, cooked his meals, managed his household, and loved him until it broke her. Free. The word echoed inside Vanessa's mind like a cruel refrain. Free from the woman who stood by him when his paycheck was late. Free from the person who covered for him when he stayed out too long, who kept his secrets, who smiled in front of his friends and family, even when her heart was heavy. Earlier that day, the doctor had stood by the door, speaking in a low, careful tone. She is not dead, he had explained. She is in a coma. There is still a minimal chance she could wake up. Before he could finish, Trevor had lifted a hand, cutting him off with a careless gesture. Let us be honest, doctor, Trevor said. She is already gone. The sentence echoed in Vanessa's mind now, each word pressing into her like a bruise that would never fade. The doctor's silence afterward told her he had heard more than just impatience. He had heard a son, a husband, and a lover willing to erase a breathing woman. Sierra moved closer to the bed and adjusted the blanket with mock tenderness. She does not need all this care anymore, Sierra said gently. Let nature finish what exhaustion started. Her words were smooth, the tone almost sympathetic, as if she were offering mercy instead of indifference. Vanessa held on to every syllable like evidence. Then Sierra leaned toward Trevor, her lips near his ear. So, when do we plan the funeral? She whispered. The casual question struck Vanessa harder than any insult. They stood beside her discussing flowers, schedules, and guest lists for her burial while her heart was still beating and her mind was screaming. They talked about the service as if it were a social event. Trevor mentioned who would speak. Gloria casually suggested which relatives would need front-row seats. Sierra talked about keeping things simple. They never once spoke about what Vanessa would have wanted. To them, she was not a person anymore, just an obligation to finish. Inside her silent body, Vanessa shouted, I am here. I can hear you. Why are you burying me when I am still alive? Her mind flared with panic and fury. The effort to move even a fingertip felt like trying to lift a mountain. Her lips remained closed, her tongue heavy and unresponsive. No sound escaped. None of them realized that the woman they mocked was listening, recording every word with a clarity she had never felt before. None of them realized that each sentence they spoke was stitching together a new version of Vanessa, one that was not built on exhaustion and self-sacrifice, but on cold memory and sharpened resolve. Time had a strange way of stretching inside that room. For Vanessa, seconds elongated into hours, and hours collapsed into a dull gray haze broken only by voices and footsteps. Days passed. Mornings arrived with pale light slipping through the blinds. Nights came with shadows pooling in the corners and whispers drifting down the hallway. Vanessa lay completely still through all of it. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm she no longer controlled. Machines breathed for her when her lungs slackened. Nurses shifted her pillows, checked her vitals, and adjusted tubes she could feel but not move away from. Her body rested, but her mind never closed its eyes. She listened to footsteps outside her door. She learned the patterns of the nurses' shifts, the way one hummed softly under her breath and another sighed after every long round. She heard the doctor's measured tone as he discussed her condition with colleagues. She recognized the difference between voices that cared and voices that only wanted answers. Trevor came almost every day. He did not come with flowers or a book to read to her. He did not hold her hand or speak to her like someone who might one day open her eyes. He came as if visiting an abandoned room he would soon reclaim for himself. He sat near the bed and complained. She had no goals, he said one afternoon, his voice flat and dismissive. She had no life, just a useless housewife waiting for me to take care of her. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his legs and glancing at his phone. Always cleaning, always trying to impress my family. She never did anything that really mattered. Sierra sat beside him, legs crossed, posture relaxed, as though this were a casual coffee shop conversation instead of a hospital room. She thought suffering would make her valuable, Sierra replied. Some women do not know when to stop. They never looked at Vanessa as they said it. To them, she was already a story told in past tense. Vanessa wanted to scream that she had worked not because she was worthless, but because she loved them. She wanted to tell them that every early morning and late night came from believing she was building something lasting. Instead, her body lay unmoving while her mind swallowed every insult and stored it like a weapon. At night, the pain shifted into something new. It was no longer about aching muscles or burning joints. It was the pain of knowing that the man she had cooked for every day now laughed beside her bed. Knowing that the woman wearing her smile in public was silently waiting to dance on her grave. Gloria visited less often than her son, but when she arrived, her words clung longer than anyone else's. She brought the heavy smell of perfume and the sound of judgment wrapped in quiet phrases. She brought her own version of history, one where Vanessa had always been the wrong kind of wife, the wrong kind of woman. She brought this on herself, Gloria said coldly one evening, standing at the foot of the bed. No woman should overwork for a family that is already complete. She lifted her chin and looked down at Vanessa's still form. All that effort, and she still failed. Failed whispered through Vanessa's mind like a challenge instead of a verdict. Vanessa heard conversations she was never meant to hear. How long will she stay like this? Trevor asked the doctor in a quiet hallway one afternoon. 30 days, the doctor replied, his voice careful but honest. 30 days before any decisions would be considered. 30 days for a family to decide what to do with a living woman. And after that, Trevor pressed, his tone sharp and eager, as if counting down to a deadline. The family can decide, the doctor said, avoiding his eyes. Decide. The word exploded inside Vanessa like a spark. Decide whether she should keep breathing. Decide whether the machines should keep humming. Decide whether the woman they had used up deserved more time. Vanessa began counting the days in her head. She counted them with the same precision she once used for budgets and schedules. Each day stretched like a year. She replayed scenes from her marriage, endless chores, blaming words, forced smiles, and layered them over this new reality where her husband could not wait to sign her life away. Then, slowly, her memory stepped back beyond the marriage. Before Trevor. Before the small house and the tired routines. She remembered conference rooms with tall windows overlooking city skylines. She remembered quiet meetings at long tables, the weight of contracts in her hands, and the subtle nods of respect from people who understood what she had built. She remembered signing papers that transferred ownership, shifting companies like pieces on a chessboard. She remembered startup teams in Detroit, a manufacturing plant in Houston, financial holdings in New York, and commercial real estate from Dallas to Los Angeles. She remembered making strategic choices and then stepping back, deliberately making herself smaller in the eyes of the world. She had chosen it. She had chosen to live simply, to tuck her wealth out of sight, to trade boardrooms for kitchens and spreadsheets for grocery lists. She had wanted something that could not be bought, a love untouched by money, a husband who saw her, not her net worth or her influence. In that hospital bed, she saw how wrong she had been. They demanded everything from her time, her labor, her energy, yet never once looked beyond what she provided. They never saw the woman behind the work. They only saw what she did for them. Now she saw what they did when they believed she could give them nothing more. They revealed themselves without knowing she was watching. On the 12th day, their tone had shifted. Sierra came dressed in bright colors instead of mourning black. Confidence glowed on her face as she sat at Trevor's side, legs crossed, fingers lightly resting on his arm. She looks peaceful, Sierra said, gazing at Vanessa's still body. Almost like she knows it is over. Trevor smiled, his expression easy and relaxed. She will not wake up, he replied. They said it like a conclusion they had reached together, like the final decision of two people whose future was already unfolding without the woman who had once held their lives together. Vanessa felt something hard and cold form deep inside her chest. Nurses whispered when they thought no one was listening. They are planning her funeral already, one said quietly near the door. It is heartless. Another nurse, moving a tray, replied, some people only show love when money is involved. Vanessa heard that and held on to it. It was the first time anyone in that building had truly named what she was hearing. Days crawled by. On the 18th day, Vanessa's thoughts grew sharper, less clouded by fear and more defined by determination. I will not die, she told herself. I will not let them bury me while my heart is still beating. Her body remained still, but her will turned into something steady and unyielding. She replayed every cruel word, every laugh, every plan made over her body as if she were a memory. Each recollection tightened her focus. They will regret thinking I am weak, she told herself. They will see that I am alive, that I was never as powerless as they believed. Every heartbeat became an act of quiet defiance. On the 21st day, her right index finger twitched. It was the smallest movement, barely more than a flutter, but a nurse standing nearby saw it and froze. The nurse leaned in, watching closely, then hurried out to call the doctor. Footsteps rushed back into the room. Lights flicked brighter. Tests began. Hope entered the room carefully, like someone afraid of being asked to leave. They checked her pupils, her reflexes, her brain activity. Numbers shifted on the monitors. The doctor's eyebrows lifted, his expression slowly changing from neutrality to cautious optimism. Vanessa could not see him, but she heard the subtle difference in his breathing. She was not done yet. On the 24th day, Vanessa's eyelids fluttered open for a few seconds. The room blurred, shapes and shadows blending together before closing again. It felt like lifting 100 pounds with each blink. The doctor leaned close. "She is coming back," he said softly. For the first time, someone spoke about her future as if it still existed. That night, when the ward was quiet and the overhead lights were dimmed, the doctor sat by her bed. Vanessa forced her eyes open again. Her throat was dry, each attempt at sound scraping like sandpaper. After several tries, a whisper finally slid out. "Do not tell them yet," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. The doctor hesitated. "You have been in a coma for weeks," he replied gently. "They think that you are." "I know what they think," Vanessa interrupted, a small surge of strength pushing through her words. "That is why I am asking. Please, do not tell my husband. Do not tell his family. Not yet. I am asking you to trust me." Silence stretched for a moment. The doctor studied her face, the faint determination in her eyes. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "For now, I will keep your progress between us. But you need rest, and you need time. We will monitor you closely. If anything changes, I will come to you first." Vanessa closed her eyes, relief and resolve mixing together. The next 2 days were slow and painful. Vanessa learned how to sit up without fainting. Nurses supported her as she swung her legs over the side of the bed, the floor feeling unsteady beneath her bare feet. She took her first steps with a physical therapist at her side, each movement sending waves of pain through muscles that had been still too long. At night, when the hospital quieted again, her memories returned with greater clarity. Trevor's laughter beside her bed. Sierra's whispers about her funeral. Gloria's remarks about her failure. She did not cry. There were no tears left to give them. All that remained was a calm, deliberate kind of anger that did not burn out. On the 26th day, Vanessa woke fully. The room felt clearer, sharper. The steady beeping of the monitor sounded like a metronome, anchoring her to reality. Pain rushed through her body like fire when she shifted her legs, but it was a pain that proved she was still here. She inhaled slowly, feeling air move through her lungs on its own. Her eyes opened and stayed open. The ceiling above her came into focus, followed by the fluorescent lights and the curtain near the door. When she turned her head, she saw the doctor standing at her bedside, his expression frozen in surprise, then softening into disbelief, then settling into relief. "You are awake," he said quietly, almost to himself. Vanessa tried to speak. Her lips trembled and her throat burned. She swallowed, forcing her voice to cooperate. "Yes," she whispered. The word was thin but real. Tears slipped down the sides of her face, but they were not tears of helplessness. They were tears of someone who had survived long enough to choose what came next. She remembered everything. Every word, every laugh, every conversation held over her silent body. She remembered Trevor's dismissal, Sierra's contempt, Gloria's cruelty. Her fingers curled into the sheets, as if she were gripping all of it at once. "Please," she said after a long pause, "do not tell anyone. Not my husband. Not his mother. Not his mistress." The doctor drew in a breath. "That is a serious request," he said quietly. "They believe you are close to the end. They are already making arrangements. You are asking me to withhold information." Vanessa met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I am asking you to give me a chance to decide what happens to my own life. Just a few days." After a moment, the doctor nodded again. "We will keep your recovery off the official updates for now," he replied. "You need physical therapy, and we will move you to a private wing under my supervision. No visitors without your consent. We can manage that." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, grateful. Now the next part was up to her. Over the following 2 days, she moved through a quiet part of the hospital where fewer people passed by her door. She practiced walking with a cane, her legs shaking with each step. She forced her arms to lift, her fingers to grip a glass of water, her lungs to take deeper breaths. Every small victory was another piece of herself reclaimed. Between exercises, she asked for her phone. The doctor hesitated but eventually handed it to her, connected to a charger, wiped clean. Vanessa scrolled through old messages and calls, watching Trevor's words with new eyes. Apologies that had been half-hearted. Promises that had never been kept. Excuses that now sounded hollow. She opened a secure app hidden behind an innocuous icon. Her world widened. Messages from assistants in New York and Houston. Reports from managers in Detroit and Los Angeles. Waiting for your final decision, one message read. Another said, we can move forward as soon as you give the word. Her thumbs moved slowly as she typed. Proceed with all preparations. She called her senior advisor, a man named Leonard whom she trusted more than anyone in her personal life. Leonard, she said, her voice still raspy. It is Vanessa. I have been unavailable, but I am back. He exhaled in relief. We have been worried, he said. I kept everything exactly as you left it. Are you ready for us to implement the contingency plan? Yes, she replied. Start with the energy firm in which Trevor holds a management position. Remove every access he has under our holdings. I want every contract he depends on reviewed and, if connected to us, terminated legally and cleanly. No laws broken. No corners cut. Just consequences. Leonard was silent for a second. Understood, he said. Consider it done. Vanessa spent the night sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the hospital. She thought about the house she had once called home on the outskirts of Baltimore, about the yard she had swept, the meals she had cooked, the rooms she had dusted. She pictured it now filled with chairs and black clothes, waiting for her coffin. On the 28th day, Vanessa signed her discharge papers quietly. The doctor gave her instructions, prescriptions, and a final searching look. Are you certain you are ready for this? He asked. You do not owe them anything. You could simply leave. Vanessa slipped her arms into a simple coat. I know, she said, but I am not going back for them. I am going back for myself. She left the hospital with a small bag, a cane, and all the strength she had left. The air outside felt colder than she remembered, but also cleaner. A car waited at the curb, sent by one of her companies at her request. She climbed in slowly and gave the driver the address she had once written on countless online orders as home. When she stepped out of the car in front of the house, noise spilled from inside the gate. Laughter, music, the murmur of guests. Black folding chairs filled the yard, lined up under rented canopies. People wore dark clothing, but their faces were animated, their voices too loud for a day that was supposedly about mourning. They were preparing for her funeral like it was a neighborhood event. The caterers moved in and out of the kitchen she had once cleaned alone. A sound system sat in the corner of the yard, humming softly as a worker adjusted the microphone stand. Vanessa stood at the gate and watched, letting every detail sink into her. Her husband, no, the man who had worn that title, moved around the yard giving instructions. Move those chairs closer, Trevor said, his voice brisk and confident. People will come early. Make sure the front row is reserved for family. His face was relaxed, a hint of pride in his posture. This was his show now, and he was enjoying it. Sierra walked through the house as if it were already hers, pointing, laughing, touching things Vanessa had bought with her own money. She carried a glass in her hand and chatted with a cousin Vanessa barely recognized, tossing her head back with loud, easy laughter. Everything about her said this was the beginning of a new life, not the end of someone else's. She would have liked this, Sierra said to Trevor as she surveyed the setup. Simple, cheap, just like her life. They both laughed. The sound traveled through the yard and reached Vanessa where she stood just inside the gate. Something inside her settled, not with rage, but with clarity. She had seen enough. It was time. Vanessa stepped forward, walking slowly but steadily. Her cane tapped against the concrete. The first person who saw her dropped a plate. The crash rang through the yard like a warning bell. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Music cut off. Chairs creaked as people stood or twisted in their seats to see what had silenced the noise. Someone near the front screamed. The sound was sharp and high, snapping through the air. Trevor turned, confusion knitting his brow. His gaze landed on her, and the confusion crumbled. His face shifted from disbelief to horror, then to a kind of naked fear he had never shown her when she was begging for his kindness. How are you alive? Trevor stammered, his voice cracking. You are supposed to be dead. His hands shook slightly as he stepped backward, bumping into a chair. Sierra froze, her laughter dying on her lips. Her glass tilted, spilling liquid onto the ground as her fingers tightened around the stem. Gloria dropped the cup in her hand. It shattered against the walkway, coffee splashing over her shoes. You were gone, Gloria said, eyes wide, voice shaking with anger more than fear. You were buried in our minds. We made peace with it. We accepted it. You cannot just walk back in here. Vanessa looked around at the chairs, the decorations, the printed programs on a nearby table with her name and an invented date beneath the words, in loving memory. Her funeral had been arranged while her heart still beat and her mind still remembered. She took a breath and let the silence stretch until the crowd's unease thickened. Everything you arranged for my funeral, wasted, Trevor said suddenly, his voice rising, trying to reclaim control. All of it gone to nothing. His jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. You cannot just appear and expect us to act like this is normal. Do you have any idea what we have been through? Vanessa's silence pressed down heavier than any scream. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Trevor, others at her, trying to understand which world they were standing in. The one with a widow's ceremony or the one where the wife had returned. Sierra turned sharply toward Trevor. Get her out of here, Sierra hissed. This is insane. Vanessa lifted her gaze, meeting each of their faces in turn. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady, cutting through the tension. I have heard all of you, she said. You thought I was weak and gone, but I have seen everything. I heard every word you said while you thought I was nothing but a body. Trevor's shoulders sagged slightly. What do you mean? He asked, though the answer was already creeping into his expression. Vanessa continued as if he had not spoken. I heard you laugh beside my hospital bed, she said. I heard you call me useless, jobless, desperate. I heard you plan my funeral while the machines kept me breathing. The yard was utterly silent now. Even the children near the back, sensing something huge and dangerous, clung to their parents' legs and watched without a sound. Vanessa reached into her bag slowly, her movements deliberate. She took out her phone and pressed one button, then lifted it to her ear. Proceed with the plan, she said calmly, and ended the call. Within minutes, Trevor's phone rang. The sound made him jump. He glanced at Vanessa, then answered. His shoulders were still squared, his voice still confident at first. Hello, he said. His expression changed as he listened. What do you mean terminated? He shouted. There must be a mistake. I have worked there for years. You cannot just. The call ended. Another call came. Then another. He fumbled with his phone, scrolling through messages as alerts flooded the screen. Emails popped up one after another. Access revoked, contract cancelled, position dissolved, benefits frozen. His mother grabbed his arm. What is happening? Gloria demanded. Trevor's hands shook as he stared at the screen. I have been fired, he whispered. The yard erupted into murmurs. Cousins exchanged glances. Neighbors shifted in their seats. Sierra's eyes narrowed. Fired? She repeated, her voice sharp. How? That does not make sense. This is not funny, Trevor. Is this some kind of trick? Trevor turned slowly toward Vanessa, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. What have you done? He asked. Vanessa straightened her back, the cane standing firm beside her. You messed with the wrong woman, she said quietly. You thought I was weak. You thought I was nothing. That was your biggest mistake. I am not the helpless housewife you decided to bury. I am the one who owns the ground you stand on. She did not rush her words. I am a billionaire, Vanessa said. I own major companies across this country. Energy firms, banks, factories, and businesses in cities you bragged about visiting. I sit behind decisions that determine who gets contracts and who does not, who eats and who goes hungry in more ways than you will ever understand. She took one step forward. I chose silence, she continued. I chose a simple life. I wanted to know if I could be loved when I had nothing visible to offer, when the numbers in my accounts did not matter. Her eyes locked on Trevor. What I found instead was cruelty wearing the mask of obligation. She let the words settle over them. I heard you celebrate my death, Vanessa said. I heard you call my life cheap and pathetic. I heard you say I had no goals and no value. I heard you approve of a funeral while my heart still beat. So I decided that if you saw me as nothing, I would answer you with everything. She lifted her phone slightly as if it were a gavel. Trevor, she said, you are finished. No company under my influence will hire you. No partner I work with will touch your name. No bank that deals with my network will trust your profile. You did not hesitate to erase me. I will not hesitate to erase your opportunities. Trevor shook his head wildly. No, he said. No, Vanessa, you cannot do this. You would not do this to me. We are family. I made mistakes, but you cannot take everything. Vanessa did not raise her voice. I am not taking anything from you, she replied. You threw it away when you stood beside my bed and celebrated my supposed death. I will make sure you wake up every day, she continued, knowing that the woman you tried to bury alive is the one who closed every door you will knock on. Not out of spite, but out of balance. You wanted a future without me. Now you have it, exactly as you built it, with your own words and your own choices. Gloria's knees buckled slightly. You are lying, she said, her voice trembling. This is impossible. You were just a housewife. Vanessa raised her phone again. Documents glowed on the screen. Ownership records, signature pages, corporate structures, all bearing her name in lines of ink and digital authorization. She held it out for Gloria to see. People moved closer, not daring to speak. They read the lines over her shoulder. They saw familiar company names, logos they had watched in commercials and headlines, all tied back to the quiet woman they had called useless. The sound of their disbelief was not loud. It was the collective intake of breath from a crowd realizing it had misjudged everything. Trevor stepped forward, tears starting to spill down his face. I did not know, he said, his voice breaking. Vanessa, please, I did not know who you were. If I had known, she cut him off with a look. If you had known, you would have tried to impress me, she said. You would have pretended to love me differently. That is not better. Gloria followed, her voice cracking. We were wrong, she said. We said terrible things. We were angry, confused. We did not mean it. We can fix this. We can change. Just give us a chance. Vanessa listened, then slowly shook her head. I lay in that bed and heard you wish for my freedom only because it freed you, she replied. Sierra stepped back, her gaze flicking between Trevor and Vanessa. So you have nothing now? Sierra asked, looking at Trevor with narrowed eyes. No job, no position, no money of your own? Trevor said nothing. His silence was louder than any answer. Sierra laughed once, a harsh, humorless sound. I stayed because of your money, she admitted. Her voice grew tighter, almost a shout. But you have nothing now. Nothing. I do not stay for men with nothing. She picked up her bag from the table, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked toward the gate. No one tried to stop her. Her footsteps echoed across the yard, a sharp rhythm of self-preservation. Trevor stood in the middle of the yard, staring after her. Betrayal swept over his face, but it was different from the betrayal he had expected to feel when Vanessa supposedly died. This time, it burned through him with no one to blame but himself. All this time, he had believed he controlled every piece of the board. Now the board no longer belonged to him. Vanessa stood above it all, steady and composed. She did not shout. She did not cry. Her calm scraped harder against their nerves than any anger could have. You buried me while I was still breathing, she said quietly. You planned my funeral while I fought for every heartbeat. You laughed while I lay in a hospital bed, trapped inside my own body. Her eyes moved slowly from face to face, making sure each person felt seen. You celebrated my fall, she said, her tone even. Today you are standing inside the ruins you built with your own hands. I did not come here to destroy you. You took care of that yourselves. I came here so you would know exactly who you tried to bury. Vanessa turned toward the gate. I am done, she said, not as a threat, not as a plea, but as a final decision. She walked away slowly, each step measured, her cane tapping softly against the path. No one followed her. No one dared to call her name. The only sound behind her was the quiet collapse of their certainty. Months later, life looked very different. Trevor's name had become a quiet warning in the industry he had once boasted about working in. Interviews ended abruptly when companies dug deeper. Applications went unanswered. Doors that had once opened for him now remained shut before he could even reach the handle. Eventually he found himself standing in lines he had mocked. Gloria moved into a small apartment across town, far from the house she had once ruled with her opinions. Conversations at family gatherings grew shorter when her comments turned bitter. People remembered how she had spoken about Vanessa on what was supposed to be a final day. Respect slipped away from her, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with quiet distance. Sierra vanished into another life in another city, leaving no forwarding address and no explanation beyond what she had already said. Her absence was its own message. The people who had once admired her confidence now remembered how quickly she had walked away when the money disappeared. The story spread in fragments and whispers, none of them flattering. Vanessa's life, once hidden, moved forward on her terms. She attended board meetings in New York again, her presence at the head of the table no longer a secret. She visited sites in Houston and Los Angeles, speaking with managers and workers who knew her name from documents, but had never seen her in person. They shook her hand with respect she no longer apologized for. In hotels and on flights, she sometimes thought about the narrow hospital bed, the humming machines, and the voices that had surrounded her when she could not move. She remembered the exact moment she realized that the man who had promised to cherish her had instead been waiting for an opportunity to declare himself free. The memory no longer hollowed her out. It clarified her. One evening, she sat in a quiet office overlooking a city skyline, the windows reflecting a life reclaimed. Her assistant stood by the door, waiting for instructions. Vanessa looked over a folder of new proposals, projects that would create jobs, expand housing, and shape communities in ways that mattered. She signed what aligned with her values and set aside what did not. She closed the folder and leaned back in her chair, letting the silence settle. She did not need to say anything to the people she had left behind. Their lives now reflected the choices they had made when they believed she was powerless. Vanessa did not chase revenge. She did not seek applause. She simply lived fully and openly, as the woman they had never bothered to see. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.